We're going to be talking triangles and 4 different shortcuts called side, 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 angle, angle, and angle, angle, side. First off, a quick review. We're going to graph y equals negative 2x plus 3. That's y equals mx plus b. So in this case, our b is positive 3. Our slope is negative 2 over 1. Since it's a negative slope, we know it's going to go down from left to right. My rise is 2, my run is 1. So I can rise 2 and go over 1 to the left to make the line go down, or I could drop 2 and go over 1 this way. Either way, I get the same line. This is y equals negative 2x plus 3. Okay, we're going to preview triangle shortcut congruencies. Triangle shortcut congruencies. From the last lesson, we learned that when you have congruent triangles, when triangles are congruent to begin with, put a congruent symbol here, you're actually going to have 6 pairs of items which are congruent. We're going to have 3 sets of segments. So 3 sets of segments which are congruent. And 3 sets of angles. So again, standard triangles means when triangles are congruent, you have 6 pairs of items which must therefore be congruent. What we're going to talk about today are 4 shortcuts. These shortcuts say if you have a minimal of 3, I'm going to write minimal of 3 certain pairs of items congruent, then it's going to imply or force all 6 pairs congruent. All congruent. The 4 shortcuts are: first one is called the side, side, side shortcut. And this says if all corresponding sides are congruent, then the triangles are congruent. It looks like this. If you have 1 pair of sides congruent, so mark them with hatch marks. Every time you have a pair of sides, I like you to put 1 S for each pair of sides. Then you have a second pair of sides congruent, 1 S for each pair of sides, and a third pair of sides congruent, another S. So by the minimal of these 3 things congruent, it actually forces all the angles to be congruent as well. That's why it's a shortcut. Under this circumstance, if all 3 corresponding sides are congruent, it forces everything else to be congruent. An example is given. Here, let's mark our freebie here. Remember, we have a reflexive side. Go ahead and mark it. We have a pair of sides. Now I'd like you to go, again, retrace the given hatch marks. We have another pair of sides. Put an S. and another pair of sides. So we can conclude that these triangles right here are congruent by the shortcut side, 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 or SSS. That's one shortcut of 4. The next shortcut says this. If you have a pair of sides which are congruent, so let's start by marking that, pair of sides which are congruent. Then you have a pair of what's called squeeze angles. That means an angle that's going to be squeezed between the sides. Put an A. And then you have another pair of congruent sides. This shortcut is called side angle side. Side, angle, side. Again, this is called a squeeze angle, or the technical name is included angle. It means an angle that is squeezed between two other sides. I call that an included angle is the technical name. I will call it a squeeze angle. Let's check out another example. Here we can see we have a freebie, so we always mark our freebies right off the bat. Our freebie is this reflexive side, so I mark it and I put an S because that's a pair of sides. Now let's retrace what you're also given. You're also given these pair of sides is equal, so we put another S. And I see that I have a pair of angles that are equal here, so I can have an A here, which is a pair of right angles. So we can see that these two triangles are actually congruent by side angle side. So our two shortcuts we have so far are side, side, side and side angle side. Okay, the next one. The next shortcut is called angle side angle. Notice here we have two angles and we have a side now that's squeezed between. So if we have a pair of angles which are congruent, then over here we have another pair of angles. And then we have a side that's squeezed between those two angles. A side that's squeezed between the two angles. That's an included side, or a squeeze side is what I will call it. A side squeezed between two different angles. This is called angle side angle shortcut. An analogy that I like to use in class is, imagine that here's your side. I call it the hamburger. Here we have a side. So imagine here's a side. This is the hamburger patty. And then the two angles would be your hands grabbing the hamburger patty. So angle side angle is two distinct angles with a side sandwiched between. That is called angle side angle shortcut. I will also nickname it the hamburger patty. In the given example, let's mark with what we have already. Let's find a freebie. We have a pair of vertical angles. Mark your vertical angles and put an A for a pair of angles. You have a pair of sides, which are marked congruent. Put an S. And then you see a couple other angles, another pair of angles. We're going to put an A. So as you can see, this creates a hamburger. So this is called angle, side angle. Not to be confused with the next one, which looks very closely like it, but is not exactly the same. In this case, there's a pair of angles. And then another pair of angles. So we have a pair of congruent angles and another pair of congruent angles. And then what's going to be called a tail side. A side that's not sandwiched between the two distinct angles, but it's the tail of one. So we're going to trace it here. This shortcut is called angle, angle, side. You could also call it side, angle, angle. It doesn't matter which way you call it or which direction you go. The analogy I use for this one is I'll call it the tail because I see it as a dog's tail. For example, we have a pair of angles at the dog's snout, a distinct pair of angles for the dog's rear end, and then you have a tail side. I will call this angle, angle, side, or side, angle, angle. That's your final and fourth shortcut. Just a note that the shortcut where you have two sides and then an angle, two sides and then an angle, is a legitimate shortcut to create two congruent triangles. The way I remember it is no bad words spelled either way. So these triangles are congruent by angle, angle, side. Here's an example. Let's start by spotting and marking our freebies. We have here a pair of vertical angles, so we mark them and we put an A. Now sweep over your given other angle hatch marks. That's another pair of angles. Then we have a pair of sides here. So we put an S. This is the shortcut angle, angle, side. So the triangles are congruent. Once again, let me show you why it's called the tail. In this case, the dog's facing the other direction. We have a pair of angles, then we have another pair of angles, and then we have a side. I call that the tail. Take just a moment and in your brain, stop and ask yourself, what is the difference, and say this out loud, what is the difference between angle, side, and, angle, side, angle, and angle, side. Take just a moment, stop the video, and explain that out loud to yourself. Okay, on this page, we're going to determine whether the triangles are congruent by the 4 shortcuts, side, 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 angle, angle, side, or not possible. It's important that you go through and look for, again, freebies. Let me give you a quick reminder of the freebies that you should be looking for. The first freebie and the most important would be vertical angles. And you should also be looking for reflexive sides, a side that's shared by 2 triangles. Reflexive angles are not as common, although if you see them, you should spot them. So let's take a shot at what we have here. Always retrace your given information first off. Okay, let's start by retracing. Here I have a pair of sides. Then I also have a pair of angles. And another pair of angles. Now that side is the tail of one angle. It's not a sandwich. So this reads either side, angle, or angle, side. So that is a legitimate shortcut. Taking a look at the right, let's start by retracing what we have. We have a pair of congruent right angles, so retrace those and put an A for angles. Then you have a pair of congruent sides, retrace and mark those. You also need to spot your freebie. Your freebie here are vertical angles, so sweep those. Those are always congruent, even if they're not marked. So you need to go in and mark them and put an A. Now look very carefully. This side right here is sandwiched between 2 angles. So technically, we have what's going on here called a hamburger, 2 distinct angles. So this would be angle, side, angle. Take a moment and ask yourself, what is different between these 2? Look really carefully. Take a moment and summarize verbally out loud what is the difference between those two diagrams. Why is the left angle, angle, side, and why is the right angle, side, angle? Okay, we're going to pick up the pace just a little bit. Always start by retracing what we have. Trace the angles and put 1A for each pair. We have a pair of angles. Trace and hatch mark the given pair of sides. And then don't forget that we have another pair of angles here because they are vertical. They are freebies. They're congruent. Even if they're not marked, you must mark them. So that shortcut there is going to be angle, side, angle. Trace the hatch marks in this one and put an S. We have a pair of sides. Here we have a pair of vertical angles. Now we have no other freebies here. We don't know if there's parallel lines. We don't see that there's any other given information. So technically in this case we have a side and an angle only, or an angle or a side. In this case we don't know that these triangles are congruent. So we're going to say not possible, because the shortcut is not possible. Taking a look at the right, let's see what we have here. Trace over those hatch marks and the sides. We have a pair of sides. Mark them. Sweep the given angles as congruent. Those are given as congruent, so we have a pair of angles. And then we have a reflexive side down the middle here. So hatch mark and put an S. That's congruent even though it's not given as congruent. So we put an S. And our shortcut here is side angle side. Okay, our last one. Let's start by marking what's given. These sides are congruent, so we put an S. We have another pair of congruent sides, put an S. Then we have a reflexive side, and since technically it's our third, and yes, it's considered a pair, we're going to put an S as well. So these are congruent by side, side, side. Last one. We have here a pair of given congruent angles, so we're going to mark them. Hatch mark, put an A. We are given a pair of sides are equal. So sweep hatch, put an S. And then notice you have a pair of straight lines intersecting. So that means these are congruent. Double hatch, it's your second set. We're going to put an A. And you can see here we have, again, two distinct angles with a side between them. That would be the hamburger, so that is called angle, side, angle. Make sure you have every single marking down, including the S's and the A's, for all the shortcuts and every problem.